to be here. So very glad to see everyone, and hopefully everybody can see the screen. This is how many of these have we done? It feels like we've done. Is this the fifth? It feels like the fourth or the fifth.
The fourth.
It is the fourth. It's hard to believe that this is the fourth cohort of Parent University already, and it truly is an honor to be with you this afternoon. I know that it's a lot to ask of you to take an hour out of your day, and I really do very much appreciate always the warm welcome that I received from Sweetwater Union High School District, and you know, the hospitality shown me by the district and by parents. And I hope you do know that we at UC San Diego, we are your partners in this adventure, and we are happy to serve in any way possible. So thank you again for inviting me into your homes, your offices, and if you are watching this recorded, onto your screens. So let me introduce myself. I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are returning who may recognize me, actually may not now recognize me, just because I am a bit beardier than I was the last time I saw you. But my name is Morgan Appel, and I am the Assistant Dean for Education and Community Outreach at UC San Diego's Division of Extended Studies. And at the Division of Extended Studies, we serve about 89,000 students across the globe, spanning pre-kindergarten all the way to post-retirement. And I see I'm getting a little bit of a square here, so I'm going to restart the sharing here. And we deliver programming both in English and Spanish, and Parent University to a variety of different school districts. But I will tell you, and don't tell anybody else, just between the, I don't know, 100 or so of us, this has got to be my favorite district, and I'm so very happy to be here again. Now, this presentation and related resources, I know that this gets posted to the Sweetwater Union High School District website. Our Spielberg of the small screen, Jacob, will do a phenomenal job of editing this and making it look great. And as he mentioned, I'm available to answer questions midstream, but if you have something afterwards, I am sure that the fine people at Sweetwater will compile them into an Excel sheet, and I will make sure your questions are answered within 24 hours. If you have anything else, this is my email. This is how you can reach me. So again, thank you. Now, we can revisit some recurring themes for Parent University, and those of you who've been in the last 4 or so cohorts probably remember this, and the idea that anything that we do, any strategy I offer, any idea I offer, any sort of support is going to be found at the intersection of head, heart, and hands. And there's a lot of research out there that really speaks to well-being and the ability to perform in a way that is not only cultivates a lifelong love of learning, but really prepares our kids for success, be they in kindergarten or be they in college. And this is the idea that these things work together in harmony. And when we look at whatever we do here at Parent University, it's going to be good for the heart, it's going to be good for the head, and it's going to be good for the hands. And you can see where these circles intersect in this Venn diagram. You will see in the middle is high performance. And we typically talk about high performance in terms of academics, and we talk about grades, and we talk about test scores. But it's also, again, developing a love for learning, cultivating essential skills that will help you navigate the world around you across the lifespan, finding a way to serve others, to serve your community. And I know that in the South Bay, that is particularly important. And for the purposes of these next sessions, we are going to call this Ithaca. And you may say, well, what do you mean? You mean the city where Cornell University is? And no, we will explain what I mean by Ithaca, but I want you to think of Ithaca as your sense of home that you carry with you, no matter where you are, that warm feeling of being around those who care about you, to support you, where you feel safest and most secure. And when we explore this Odyssey, when we look at post-secondary education, because the whole point of what we're doing in this series is we're looking at post-secondary opportunities. So what happens to our kids once they finish out secondary school, once they finish out high school? How can we best prepare them for success thereafter? And what we're going to call this is Ithaca, and it's modeled on an epic poem, an ancient Greek poem called the Odyssey by an author called Homer. And this is very connected to me because when I was in 7th grade, my 7th grade teacher would read to us from the Odyssey, and it captivated all of us. So we didn't want to leave for recess. We wanted to hear more about these adventures that were had by Odysseus, or whom we call Ulysses. And there is a alignment between the epic poem called the Odyssey and post-secondary, in the world of post-secondary education, because there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of adventures, and I want us to go on to this journey together. So let's take a look at what we mean by the Odyssey and what we mean by Ithaca. Those of you who have been here before probably remember our discussions about ancient Egypt and the ancient Egyptians' understanding of the connection between learning and emotion. So we're going to go take a look at another ancient culture, and we're going to look at ancient Greece, and we're going to look at Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey. And this will be used as a metaphor for the work we are going to be doing together over the next few weeks or so. So the Odyssey is a sequel to another epic poem by Homer, which was the Iliad, which covered adventures during the Trojan War. And the Odyssey is Homer's epic that focuses on Odysseus's 10-year struggle to return home after the Trojan War. So he battles mystical creatures and faces the wrath of the gods. His wife Penelope and his son Telemachus are staving off suitors at home, and Ithaca awaits Odysseus to return home. And the idea behind all of this is how we define what we mean by home, and how we can help you fend off suitors and fend off challenges to make sure that your child goes to a place where they feel at home. This idea of Ithaca has given you a beautiful journey. Without her, you would never have set out. She has no more left to give you, and if you find her poor, Ithaca has not mocked you. So in the story of the Odyssey, Ithaca represents not only home in the literal sense of the word, not just this idea of four walls and a roof, but also feeling at home in the head, heart, and soul. And this is what we were talking about when we were talking about those essential elements that are good for heart, good for head, and good for hands. We're going to take this journey together, and we are going to find home, whether that means at home with you, at home on a campus, at home within ourselves, and at home with our children. And our mission collectively, all of us together, is the return to Ithaca. So what does the journey look like? So I want to give you sort of a sense. I want to give you the map, the landscape of what we will be looking at. We're going to review a little bit about the cognitive, socioemotional, and metacognitive readiness for post-secondary education. These are things that we've talked about in previous sessions, but I want to make sure that we start from a common point. So we're going to look at things like growth mindset and look at focus and sort of review what we've done. And that's what today is all about. In our next sessions, we're going to look at the different types of post-secondary opportunities and goodness of fit. When I was a kid, my parents, who were both professors, had a very singular idea of what goodness of fit looked like, and that meant that I had to fit in wherever they wanted me to go. But now the world is very much different, and we can look at socioemotional readiness and metacognitive readiness and say, okay, where do our kids best fit, and how do they chart a course forward? We're going to look at a lot of practical things, going to colleges, different types of colleges. We're going to look at things like admissions, financial aid, testing, decision-making, and supports for families. And I don't just mean in terms of how do you pay for college, but also how do you participate? How can you best support your kids when they go on to college or university or other opportunities? And what opportunities are there for you as parents to participate in the process? Now, admissions offices tend to be very concerned about people getting in. We are more concerned about not only getting there, but getting through. So we're going to talk a lot about how do you survive and thrive in post-secondary education? How do you keep connected to family? How do you avoid distractions? How can parents and caregivers provide support? We're going to look at hidden codes in languages at colleges and universities. We're going to look at things like intersectionalities in post-secondary education and finding a rhythm, mentors, and preparing for new adventures. So as your children move on through the first 2 years of college onto the third and to the fourth, you know, it's a different way of looking at things. It is a different way of being on a campus, a different type of work. And now you're preparing for the next stage of life. So really what we're talking about, if you really look at it, you can see that this is all one big adventure, and you will face many challenges along the way, but you are not alone. You have us to support you. And even if your child does not wind up going to UC San Diego, we will be there to help. Now, interestingly, we often talk about mentors, and mentors are an important part of the university experience. When we get hired onto a job, oftentimes we are assigned a mentor. Those who are involved in teacher education probably have had a mentor. And the interesting thing about mentor, what mentorship is all about, and even the term mentor is derived from the Odyssey. Now, mentor in the Odyssey was a friend of the hero Odysseus. Again, some will call him Ulysses, but mentor was a friend who stayed behind in Ithaca to watch over Ulysses' son, Telemachus, to make sure he was brought up all right, as well as to look after the wife of Odysseus. So what mentor did was advise Telemachus with the objective of preparing him to take over responsibility for the family while his father was away. And your children will have many mentors. You know, they will have mentors who are assigned, but they're going to be people all around them who help get them through. So we're going to also explore the many mentors that exist within high school, the many mentors that exist among friends and things like that. But again, the idea here is that term mentor and what it is all about can be traced right back to this ancient epic tale that we are modeling. So let's get on to the review. And the idea here is that we are going to sort of make sure that we catch up from our last series of sessions, so everybody is at the same starting place before we leave on our voyage. So let's talk about the adolescent brain. And the last few times we met, we talked about adolescent behavior, we talked about risk-taking and things like that, but let's review the adolescent brain. We know that the brain reaches its largest size during adolescence. Girls around 11 and boys around age 14. And some of that speaks to maturity. And we know that the brain continues to mature even after major growth is complete. So our brains are always growing throughout our lives. However, they really reach their peak. They stop major growth in the early 20s, or perhaps maybe as late as 28. The prefrontal cortex is the last region to mature. Why is that important? Because that is the part of the brain that governs our emotions. That is the part of the brain that is critical to executive functioning. That is part of the brain that mitigates our risk-taking instincts, that is fueled by another part of the brain, the limbic system. And those of you who may remember, the limbic system is that part of the brain that generates emotions. The good thing, especially as you are looking at post-secondary opportunities, is that the teenage brain is primed and ready to learn. Plasticity is at its peak, and you may remember plasticity is the brain's ability to grow and to change across the lifespan. Now, our brains, again, they will always grow, and they will always be plastic, which means they can be shaped, they are malleable. But you really find that in the teenage years is when you see the most plasticity, and our brains are able to change. As we grow older, we lose plasticity gradually. It doesn't ever stop, but we are not as well skilled in it. This is the time, the time where your kids are in school. This is the time to emerge in challenging academic and creative activities that fuel growth. And that is not solely at school, that can be outside of school, but the brain is just wanting to grab on to just about anything. Again, it is also the time when we see mental issues, mental challenges, mental disorders appearing. Things like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, bipolar disorders, because they accompany major brain changes. So what does this have to do with post-secondary readiness? Well, you can imagine someone who is living with anxiety or depression is probably more risk averse, more change averse. And once high school is over and done with, and we're looking at the rest of our lives, those are big changes. So these are things make sure to look out for. We know that the teenage brain is more vulnerable to stress. And why is that? Because it is in the middle of major development and responds to stress differently than the brain of a child or the brain of a fully matured adult. So if you are wondering why your teenagers act like they do, this will give you a bit of a clue. Now, we know that teens sleep a lot, and we know that they probably like to sleep. And I even had to challenge myself with this prospect, but I was over at my mother-in-law's, and my nephew had somehow fallen asleep right in the middle of the living room floor, and he could not be woken up. And it just reminded me that teens sleep more, at least 9 to 10 hours. And we also know that the teen brain is incredibly resilient. The last few sessions, we talked about growth mindset. We talked about bouncing back, and brain changes at this time can also safeguard against mental disorders. So this is, 7 critical things that you should know about the adolescent brain. And we remember that our brain is really composed of 3 parts, at least speaking in terms of evolution. We know that the brain is composed of multiple and manifold lobes that are responsible for doing different things. But when we look evolutionarily, we may find that there is some better understanding of how things work. And we remember that the lizard brain that you find in the major reptiles, the major great reptiles from hundreds of thousands of years ago, is where we get our autopilot. This is where we get our flight or fight. It's called the lizard brain. It's comprised of our brainstem and cerebellum. We know this is where we find things like anxiety disorder, things like PTSD, things like obsessive compulsive disorder, all live here. And again, this is the structures that we find in the great reptiles. It's called the lizard brain. Oftentimes we'll call it the reptilian complex, but to be quite honest, the first indication we've ever had of this was in fossilized fish. I guess fish brain just did not sound as intimidating or scary. We know that the next part of the brain to evolve was the mammalian brain. And this is also called the limbic system. So on top of fight or flight and sort of autopilot, we got things like emotions and memories and habits and attachments, because as the world became more dynamic and more challenging, we needed additional tools to be able to navigate it. And we know that the brain is set up for one purpose and one purpose alone. And that purpose is survival. So as the world becomes more complicated and more complex, we need additional structures that help us to navigate it. So why is it called the mammalian brain? That is because this is where we find the basic mammals who share these things with us. Again, we can see that dogs and cats and other animals have emotions. We know that they have memories. We know that they follow habits, and we know that they develop attachments. This is the part of the brain that produces emotions. And there are two times during the lifespan when this part of the brain is really growing faster than the other parts. Does anybody remember when those times are? Now you can put it in the chat. You can shout it out if you like. I'll give you a hint. They both start with terrible. Okay, hold on. Teens, hey, oh, whoa, okay. All right, I got Veronica, I got Anna, I've got you, and you are all right. Twos and teens, terrible twos, terrible teens. And you may see that they act quite a bit like one another, because this is the point in our lives at which the part of the brain that produces emotions is growing a lot more quickly than the part of the brain that controls emotions. And we believe that this levels out, coinciding with the stoppage of major growth of the brain into our mid to late 20s. But this will also explain perhaps why the brain is primed for learning, why the brain is primed for risk-taking. If we go hundreds of thousands of years into the future from the development of the limbic system, we get what we call the human brain, the neocortex, those which contains those things that make us human, that make us distinct from some of the other mammals and certainly from the reptiles. And this is language, abstract thought, imagination, consciousness, self-awareness, reasoning, and rationalizing. Now, you may say, okay, well, I know that when my dog is bad and misbehaves, I can see that he's sorry. Well, he may look sorry, he may look apologetic, he may look forlorn, but what the dog is doing is really reacting to you. So if your dog is, sits on the couch and rips up all the pillows and you chastise him for it, he's not thinking, wow, I know this was an expensive couch, but I couldn't reach the TV, I got frustrated, I didn't know how to reach you, I can't dial the phone. So he's not going through a rationalizing process. He is reacting how you react to him. And we know that this is the same with the emotional development through the lifespan. So when you are upset with a toddler, they are reacting to the way you are acting to them versus going through a series of rationalizing or reasoning. So if You have a toddler who is embarrassing you in the store, and you are there saying, the way you're behaving, everybody's staring at us. You should not behave like that, and you need to learn a lesson. They're not going through that process with you. But again, it's important to remember that the brain, evolutionarily speaking, has 3 parts, and we rely on all of these parts all of the time. We know that the ancient Egyptians made the connection between emotion and learning. That is the limbic system. We also know that every learning activity in some way, shape, or form triggers the survival mechanism. That is the lizard brain. And again, as we go deeper into the brain, the rule is as we go deeper into the brain, the more primitive the structure. All right. Now, we also spoke a lot about the neuroscience of learning. So how do we learn? And the idea here is that in our brains, we have 100 billion nerve endings that process sensory information. Generally, 5 senses, sight, touch, smell, hearing, and taste. And we use all of those senses to learn and to make things whole in a place in our brains called the parietal lobe. And we're always processing sensory information. So when we talk about something like multisensory teaching, when teachers talk about that, really what they're talking about is engaging all of the senses. And when we are engaged in active learning, when we are focused and we are listening and we are attached to what we're learning, you will find that there are dendrites and fibers that bridge across, and they create something called a synapse. And what it is in practical terms, it is creating a neural network or a pathway. And if you were in maybe the first series of brain compatible learning, I asked you about this. I asked you what it was, and everybody said it's a pen. And I said, how do you know? And they said, well, because it's a pen. And I said, well, just saying it's a pen doesn't mean it's a pen. How do you know it's a pen? And we went through the exercise about the sensory information that tells us. And we know that in our parietal lobes, we take all of the sensory information and we make it whole. And our brains do that, millions of times per day. Now, we also know that neuroplasticity is very important. And this is where we talk about lasting functional changes. This is where we are talking about memorizing or learning new information. And this is to say that our brains change whenever we learn something new. And it is a process that educators and neuroscientists call scaffolding. And the idea is that you always have to have something to build upon to move forward. So when I asked you about the pen, we identified it as a pen, and I brought in a different pen and I said, are these 2 things the same? No, they're similar. And we looked at additional sensory information. And what we did is we built upon our knowledge of pens. And the idea behind doing that is it adds to neural networks, it makes them stronger. So for example, when we are teaching algebra, you need to know about multiplication, because without multiplication, you can't do algebra. So the idea is you meet kids where they are and you build from there. And that makes lasting changes in the brain. And those changes are also attached to emotions. Now, one of the things that we know also about the adolescent brain is that their reward systems mature before inhibitory system. The idea here is that there is a fundamental neuroscience of learning, and the neuroscience of learning has to do with the neurochemistry of persistence and the neurochemistry of avoidance, which we will talk about in just a second. But the idea here is that our brains reward us neurochemically for contributing to our own survival. In dinosaur times, that may have meant defeating or running away from a predator. Today, it could mean finishing a crossword puzzle. It could mean finding a new way to go to work. It could mean getting an A on a test. So whenever the brain detects that you are doing something that contributes to your survival in the world, you are rewarded neurochemically. And we know that for teenagers, these systems are often running. They are pedal to the metal, whereas the inhibitory systems are not. So this is to say that risk-taking is part of the brain where you get a lot of reward. So if you take a risk and you survive a risk, your brain rewards you. Now, for teenagers, at least for the teenage brain, they don't distinguish between the scope and scale of risk. So for teenagers, we could look at answering a question on a test out loud as a risk, and skating down the Coronado Bridge as a risk. The teenage brain does not make the distinction between those two things, and that's why they are less risk averse, perhaps, than adults or smaller kids. So again, how then do we attend to this risk-taking nature? Are there ways that we can channel to take the risks that produce the rewards that we want, but are not a threat to safety? We also understand about emotion, and we talked a lot about emotional development, and we know that during adolescence, high levels of emotion may prove to be beneficial. Emotions are the way that we connect with others, and this is a time during our lives when we are very much concerned about connecting with others, where we are concerned about perhaps becoming a little bit more independent from our family units, but we are seeking connection with friends and with peers. This also reinforces the idea that learning with emotion is the learning that sticks. And whenever a lot of emotion is attached to a learning experience, it is more likely to transition from sensory memory to short-term memory to long-term memory. And I can tell you in the post-secondary environment, there is a lot of learning with emotion. There is a lot of novelty and the brain adores novelty. When I talk about novelty, that means learning about something new or a new perspective on something that really the brain can attach to and glom onto. And again, we know that risky behavior taps into the same systems as rewards, irrespective of the type of risk taken. So again, as we look towards success in this post-secondary environment, we want to make sure that we can help our kids navigate distractions, risk-taking distractions, because this risk-taking behavior does not disappear entirely when one graduates from high school. Some might say that it actually becomes amplified during your freshman and sophomore years of college. But what you can see is when we look at the affective regions, you can see that they are growing more rapidly. And that's sort of when we talk about emotions, we talk about the affective regions, and the cognitive control regions are growing a little bit less rapidly. So as we transition to adulthood, early 30s, they tend to balance out. So again, something to consider as we move kids from high school into college. What does not change? What does not change, what remains consistent, what always remains the same, is that everything we're talking about, head, heart, and hands, the intersectionalities, what governs the level of success in doing any of these things really comes down to a very simple matter of neurochemistry. And we look at two types of neurochemistry. One is the neurochemistry of persistence. Again, we talk about the brain rewarding us neurochemically for doing things that contribute to our own survival. And we know that when we have positive feelings about a learning experience, so if you are in a classroom where you feel safe and secure, where you have friends, where you enjoy what you're doing, where the teacher is providing an engaging experience with feedback, everything that we would want to see in the classroom, it fuels the neurochemistry of persistence. Things like endorphins that give us a sense of euphoria, things like dopamine that stimulate our prefrontal cortex, oxytocin. Oh, gosh, I almost said OxyContin. Do not write down, if you're taking notes, do not write down OxyContin, oxytocin, which is the puppy love chemical, the neurochemical that is associated with relationships and warmth and family, that sort of thing. So whenever we do anything that contributes to our survival, whenever we have a positive feeling about a learning experience, it produces this neurochemistry. And this is the neurochemistry that encourages us to keep doing the same stuff and maybe even taking a bit of a risk and doing something new along the same lines. So if you've had an incredible experience in your high school classes and you have fallen in love with the learning process, you are more likely to want to go on to a college, no matter what kind of college or university it is, but you will pursue learning. Now, conversely, negative feelings about a learning experience produce two neurochemicals. One is norepinephrine or noradrenaline, and cortisol. These are the neurochemistry that is associated with survival and causes anxiety. So when we were talking about the lizard brain and when we were talking about fight, flight, or freeze, that is exactly what we are talking about. When we are talking about flying down the freeway and slamming on the brakes, and what happens when you barely miss hitting somebody in front of you, how you feel immediately thereafter, where you feel as though the blood is drained to your feet, where you're feeling cold, maybe a bit nauseous, a bit headachy, and certainly upset. That is what we call the neurochemistry of avoidance. And that is your brain's way of saying, keep out of situations like this because they are detrimental to your survival. Now, it doesn't always have to do with dinosaurs and speeding cars. You can imagine that there are some kids who are sitting in classrooms now who feel alone, who feel as though they can't catch up. Maybe they don't understand the concepts. Maybe they are struggling with language. They could be struggling with a lot of other things, but basically they are having this experience again and again where they're not only feeling the mental impacts, but also the physical impacts. So mentally, they feel tired, they feel exhausted, and physically they may feel is the same way as one might feel after almost being in an accident. We call this the neurochemistry of avoidance, and you tend to avoid places that make you feel like that. So if you've ever wondered why you might see dropouts or absenteeism, it has to do with that. So if you think about the teenage brain, you're always going to want to steer these kids towards things that amplify positive things. Now, it's not always going to be like this. We're not always going to have the neurochemistry of persistence, but really that is the key to it all. It all comes back to the brain. And, again, the Egyptians understood that there was a connection between emotion and learning, but they thought it lied within the heart when it actually was in the head instead. So they got the neuroscience wrong, but they got the idea behind it just right. Now, when we take a look at the brain a little more closely, and we link it to the post-secondary experience, we can see why it is sometimes so difficult to get our kids thinking about what comes after high school, because with the teenage brain, there is always an immediacy and a focus on the present. So even if they are juniors or seniors, college feels like it is often 10 years away. They're not thinking about that. I remember when my parents kept saying, you know, you're in your junior year, you need to start applying, you need to start taking the test, but it seemed so far away. And I had things that I had to deal with in the immediate that as a teenager, I thought were incredibly important. Looking back on it, they were not at all. One of the ways that we can mitigate this sort of perspective is to provide college experiences as early as is possible. So sometimes we are talking about summer activities that are sponsored by a college tours, finding a way to interact with post-secondary education and ensure those experiences are positive. One of the things that we do in education and community outreach is we sponsor workshops for kids as young as kindergarten. So when they get to us, the idea is it feels like home. It feels like something they've been going towards all of their lives. College can be a major departure, and when we liken it to the Odyssey, you can imagine sailing across the seas, sometimes without a map. Teens feel a lot of pressures. I think we've talked about that at great length in the past. They are unlikely to let you know how much stress that they feel. Some of the pressures, they are self-generated or may be a result of sort of a distorted thinking and an obsession with self. Others are more explicit. And it's really important to know, that, and we're going to talk about this in our next sessions, is that when we think about college, it's really about the fit between the student, the family, and the institution. Now, I remember as a young lad growing up, the expectation was if you don't go to Harvard, if you don't go to Yale, if you don't go to Annapolis, it's not worth going. I think our thinking about college and post-secondary opportunities has matured, and not everybody has to go to college immediately after high school. There are a lot of different opportunities. There's certificates, there's gap years, all of these things that we will explore. But remember, what our responsibility is as educators and as parents is to be able to provide a sense of security and a sense of enthusiasm, a sense of peace of mind, or what in this context we have called Ithaca. Now, we also want to go over a bit stages of adolescence, because this is really where we start thinking about post-secondary opportunities. And it's important to know what sort of emotional development that you are seeing. And adolescence is really like the 1960s. You know, there's so much going on that you really have to break it into distinctive periods. So you look at early adolescence, you look at middle adolescence, and you look at late adolescence. And one of the things that we know about early adolescence is that it begins about age 10 and lasts until age 14. Girls will probably start earlier than do boys. And this is the onset of puberty and everything that goes along with it. Physical growth. Cognitively, we find that adolescents in this early period have a limited capacity for abstract thought. So they are looking at very concrete types of things, but their intellectual interests are expanding and they are becoming more important. They have a limited interest in the future. And when we talk about the future, we may be talking about a year away, we may be talking about 10 years away. But we are also talking about moral thinking and the development of morality that becomes deeper during early adolescence. This is probably the roughest period of adolescence. When we look at ages 15 through 17, we find that puberty is basically completed. Physical growth slows for females, but typically continues for males. This is the point at which we develop a growing capacity for abstract thought. And when you look at the kinds of classes that your kids are taking at this age, that also reflects it. This is the point at which the kids are setting long-term goals, and they're thinking very philosophically. They're trying to figure out where their fit in the world is, what the meaning of life is, but they're also trying to figure out what their lives are going to look like. You will see a lot of socio-emotional changes, increased self-involvement, which means they're inwardly focused, and an increased drive for independence. So this is a time where kids are really trying to find themselves and to think about the future. Now, as we go into young adulthood, we find physical development has just about stopped. We see a maturity in terms of rational thought, executive function, this idea of delaying gratification, more thought into planning for the future, and a firmer sense of identity. So you can see that if you work in parallel with these developmental stages in thinking about the future, it can match up quite nicely. You will also find more stability emotionally and continued striving for independence, but not in the same way. They're not quite as desperate for it as they had been in the past. Things that you will traditionally see, again, these are common behaviors: lying, primarily to avoid consequences; asserting independence by arguing; defiance, the same thing. Usually every adolescent will go through an awkward phase, and it's a very short time-bound phase where they don't feel like they fit in. They're very self-conscious. That's part of the brain's limbic system coming to terms with itself. You'll find them abandoning commitments without a whole lot of thought, moving towards friends, perhaps and away from family. There was a song as I was entering young adulthood called "Parents Just Don't Understand." And the best way to describe what I'm talking about is attitude. People, where your kids will have what can possibly best be depicted as attitude. They're always sort of rubbing up against you, always sort of waging war with you. A lot of impulsivity. This will happen traditionally more in early to mid adolescence as the limbic system is developing and our risk-taking centers are developing exponentially. Academic problems, and the reason for this is because for teenagers, the priorities tend to be social and finding themselves. So academics typically takes a back seat. Boundary testing through curfew violations, low impulse control. Anybody who's had a teenager in the house knows that the refrigerators are typically empty. So you see increase in appetite that also has to do with physical growth. Short fuses that may be hormonal. Verbal aggression. Very concerned about physical appearance, much pickier than they used to be, perhaps. Sleeping longer and more soundly, we talked about that. Selfishness, low self-esteem in certain cases, a greater interest in privacy, at least keeping thoughts to themselves or away from you, and frequent changes in relationships. So again, this is the context. So as you are planning for the future, these are things to bear in mind. So when you come home with a number of pamphlets or ideas about what happens after graduation, if they don't immediately jump on board, this is part of the reason why. Some of it has to do with identity development. And at this stage in our lives, we are trying to make ourselves distinct from our parents. A lot of our time, as you can see here, is spent trying to find out who we are and exploring. It's like wearing different hats every day just to figure out where we fit in. And that's called diffusion. We also can look at the level of commitment, the level of exploration, and we look at something called foreclosure, which basically says, before I explore anything else, I'm going to define who I am. A lot of times it is in opposition to parents. So you can imagine a father or mother who is a doctor who is pressuring their kids to go to medical school may decide that the only thing that they do not want to be is a doctor because their parents are doctors. So it is making a premature commitment, or they may decide that they want to be something because they find it exciting and exhilarating without really exploring. So we have that as part of it. Motivation, we know that motivation connects to self-perception, cognitive affective growth, as well as to the neuroscience that we talked about earlier. Complex, multifaceted, and dynamic. So we're going to talk a lot as we move forward about motivation and meeting the very basic needs of our kids. And a lot of times we wonder, why are they not focused on academics? Why are they focused on these things? Because the idea, at least behind Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is that we need our most basic needs satisfied first. We need to feel secure. We need to feel safe before we can work on other things. So, if you are in a classroom and you are far behind and you feel very insecure, or you are worried about what's going to happen to you when you get home or how you're going to get home, you're really not thinking about realizing your full potential. You're not really thinking about self-esteem. You're just thinking about getting through. So how do we then, as educators, how do we then, as parents, ensure that we attend to the most basic needs first? A lot of that has to do with socio-emotional needs, and we're going to talk about that as we explore options for post-secondary education. And a lot about expectancy theory that we spoke of in our last sessions. And this is the idea of belief in self. And the idea is, can I achieve this? And if I do, what will come as a result, and how important is that result? So when we are looking at supporting our kids as they pursue the future, we have to work with them on a variety of different elements, and it doesn't have to be just you. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take not only the teachers and the schools and the parents, but it's also going to take the community. It's going to take the universities, and we'll see how we can do that and how we can select an endpoint to our journey and how we can get there most effectively. Resilience is probably the key to getting through. Not only did that prove true for Odysseus in Homer's poem, but for any of us who have pursued post-secondary education, because it's not always going to be perfect. We are going to fall. We are going to have to pick ourselves back up again. And from the Odyssey, this passage, nevertheless I pine all my days to travel home and see the dawn of my return. And if a god will wreck me yet again on the wine-dark sea, I can bear that too, with a spirit tempered to endure. Much have I suffered, labored long and hard by now in the waves and the wars. And to this total bring the trial on. And that means that we are a lot stronger than we think we are, but we all do need to rely on others for assistance. And we know that teenagers tend to be very help averse. They don't like to ask for it. So we have to think of ways that we can best support our kids on this journey. So I know our time draws near, so I want to open this up to questions. I want to make sure that I take a look at the Q&A, and I'm seeing questions from Irma Delgado, and I think yes, the answer to your question there is yes. And let's see. Okay. And let me see if there are any in chat. Any questions? Perhaps I can ask Jacob and Griselda to come back.
Hi, Dr. Appel. Sorry I was late. It was a great presentation. I really appreciate you partnering with us. We do, I don't know if you have time for one of the questions on the chat.
Very much so.
Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought it was a very good question. Where is it? ¿Cómo? Okay, I'm going to try to translate it, or Ana, if you probably already translated it already. The first question is from Guadalupe Estrada. It happens frequently that our students, this happens frequently when our students are taking examinations. This is why it's important that the teachers understand how they feel as adolescents. How can we, so the teachers can understand, how can we help, I guess, so teachers can understand the different feelings that adolescents are going through?
Yeah, so
what can we do?
That is a great question. And I think that when we approach work with districts, at least from our vantage point, our idea is that we want to be able to support everybody. So I think we want to make sure that if we're going to make education a beneficial experience, if we're going to do things that are transformational in the best interest of kids, everybody has to speak the same language, even though it is in a different dialect. And I don't believe that there is a lot of adolescent psychology that is included in teacher licensing courses, because you have to go through pretty quickly. So, I think one of the things that is important, that when parents communicate with teachers, that they are sort of well-versed, that they have a good understanding of what their kids are going through, and saying, hey, this is not unique to my kid. This is what happens socioemotionally throughout the lifespan. And certainly I think that we would be very happy to provide a short session for teachers. We're not training anybody to be psychiatrists, so we're not training anybody to be neuroscientists, but just to say, hey, as you're thinking about this, because we're all in this together, we all want to support our kids as they make good decisions moving forward. Here's some of the things that are beneficial to teachers, knowing about adolescent development, early, middle, and late. Because I know that when I was in high school, I frustrated my teachers no end. And if I could find them, I would certainly apologize to them. But I think understanding the basics, and I think even then you can have more informed conversations about supporting kids, especially those who look like they may not be interested, or those who don't participate, probably just need a different approach.
Thank you, Dr. Appel. You are so completely correct. And our district does work to provide professional development for our teachers, specifically through our equity and restorative practice department and staff that work under that department with Dr. Vernon Moore. So I will bring that up as a topic of consideration when they are getting ready to do their professional development at the school sites. I want to thank you, and I want to welcome and say thank you for participating to all the parents that were here this afternoon. I also want to kind of remind you, Dr. Appel, that as we did last year, if all parents complete the series, that they will be eligible to get a certification of completion through UCSD. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, Grisela. I can't believe I forgot. See, it's so good when you're here to provide me with some guidance. Yeah, so every parent, every caregiver who completes all of the workshops in the series. So I mean, you may be here watching it live. You may be watching a recording of it. Every parent who completes will receive a certificate of achievement from the university, and it is basically like a small diploma, and indicates that you have acquired proficiency in this area, and we distribute them at the end. And it would be lovely, it would be fantastic to have some kind of a celebration, a ceremony, because I think that I have only known all of our parents and caregivers through Zoom. I don't know if what they look like, beyond the shoulder. So it'd be great to be able to see people in person, but everybody will most definitely get a certificate.
Thank you so much, Dr. Appel. And it's so great to hear you say that, because we are anxious of trying to see when we can have a in-person professional development meeting like this one instead of a webinar. It is, I think our parents have requested it, but of course we are putting safety first and foremost. But I'm thinking at the end of the year, we might have a little bit more of a flexibility having an event, you know, with set proof of vaccination and or testing, where we can all get together and you can personally give out these certificates of completion, because our parents really enjoy and are proud of the work and the knowledge that they have gained.
And as they should be, and not only if we get together in person, we will also, because you are all students here at UC San Diego, we will make sure that you get some swag too. We can also send some swag down your way anyway for distribution, but it would be great to be able to hand it out in person. Now, I've had a quick look at the chat and the Q&A, and everybody's asking, well, how can I motivate my kids to want to go to college? How can I steer them in the right direction? And if anybody had those questions, they were my parents. My parents were both professors, and the one thing I did not want to be is in college. I wanted to do anything except to do that. So I am a good case study. And this is something that we will cover in our next session and the sessions thereafter, when we have a chance to dive a little bit more deeply into those strategies. And it's the same thing that we tell our teachers. It's all about knowing your kids in great depth, knowing where their interests lie, knowing what makes them tick, knowing what things to avoid, and we will find a way to do that. There would be nothing better for me to see all of your kids at UC San Diego, but I know it's not the only choice out there. Maybe it is, but I am happy to answer. I don't know, Griselda, how much time we have. I know our parents are busy, but I can answer a few more questions.
1 hour, and we do try to end it at the hour to be respectful of everybody's time. But of course, we want to make sure we thank you and make sure everybody knows when our next session is. And Mr. Dominguez, you want to announce our next session and how people can register?
Yeah, our next session will be next week, which is October the 19th from 1 to 2, just the same time. We will be holding a little more of an interactive session that time, and we will be going over the different opportunities that students have once they graduate high school, in terms of, you know, going to university or college, maybe a community college, maybe even a trade school. And Dr. Appel will be talking about that. You can register at the same website that you registered for this one. We did not make one registration because I know parents sometimes are more interested in one than another one, but you can register for all 8 at one time if you wanted to. You just have to go through each one of the sites so you can get the link, each one of the links, or you can register individually. You will be getting a confirmation from us once you register, so make sure you look out for that confirmation, and on there it should say join session once the session opens, which is once again next Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dominguez. And again, Mr. Appel, thank you for joining us again this year and for embarking on another great series that I think our parents are going to enjoy, exploring the journey to a college world in this crazy world that we live in now.
Oh, and getting crazier by the day. And parents, caregivers, please make sure if you have questions, let the district know. They will send them to me. They'll send me a big sheet of questions, and I will answer them, and I will get them right back to you.
And Ms. Simmons, thank you for your help as well. I don't know if she's out there.
Yep.
And thank you, Ana, for all your help as well. And our interpreter, Ms. Martinez, is there too. Thank you so much for interpreting the session and for being part of this great new series.
All right, everyone. All right. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.